He lay on top of her like a shield, bleeding from one paw and growling low at anyone who approached. He was barely 5 months old, a German shepherd puppy trying to protect a dying fawn. It was broad daylight, one of those days that should feel warm and safe, but the scene was anything but. There was blood on the leaves, tufts of fur caught in thorns, and a twisted metal fence like a cruel trap. The fawn was tangled in the underbrush with scraped legs and unable to stand. It must have been there for hours, maybe all night. We could see drag marks. They called us after some hikers heard strange cries in the forest. We thought it might be an injured coyote, but what we found was worse. The puppy, thin and covered in dirty, matted fur, was lying next to the small body of the fawn. His ribs showed under his skin, and he looked like he belonged to that place, as if he had decided that's where he should die. My name is Emily, and I'm a volunteer on a rescue team in Asheville, North Carolina. I've seen bad things before, but nothing like this. Nothing that squeezed my chest like this puppy's eyes did. Big, glassy eyes full of pain, defiance, and something else I couldn't name. He didn't bark and run when he saw us approaching. He growled, raised a swollen and bleeding paw, and stood firm. His ears were trembling, pulled back, defying us. He wasn't afraid. He was ready to fight. "What is he doing?" someone whispered behind me. "He's protecting her," I said, almost without realizing what I had said. The fawn was barely breathing. Her little legs were trembling, and she had lost quite a bit of blood. If we had arrived an hour later, she probably wouldn't have made it. And I think he knew it. I crouched down slowly with my palms extended. I spoke to him softly, telling him that I saw him, that I understood what he was doing. He growled once more, then turned his head and gently licked the fawn's ear. My heart broke. This wasn't a wild animal acting on instinct. This was a puppy who had decided to stay with another living being who couldn't ask for help. We called the wildlife team to attend to the fawn while I took care of him. He shuddered at the sight of the gloves, backed away from the leash, but didn't flee. When I managed to get close enough, I saw a patch of raw skin under his front paw where there must have been a collar before. Someone had owned him. Someone had abandoned him. "What happened to you, sweetheart? Who left you here?" I whispered. He didn't answer, of course. He just looked at me with his eyes fixed on the stretcher where they were lifting the fawn, who we later learned was named Willow, and then he did something that left us speechless. He stood up with effort, trembling, his injured paw dragging, and followed the stretcher. He followed her to the edge of the forest as if he wasn't ready to let her go. The wildlife team stopped and looked at me. I swallowed hard. "Let him come with us, just for now." The officer hesitated and then nodded. "Fine, but he's your responsibility." "He already is," I said without thinking. I called him Ranger. It seemed like a fair name. I took him to my car, not knowing I had just brought home something that would change everything. That night, Ranger didn't sleep. Neither did I. He paced back and forth in the living room, tense as if he still heard something out there in the forest. Every time a branch hit the window or the house creaked, his ears would lift, his body would tense. He didn't bark or whine. He just listened to something I couldn't hear. I offered him a blanket and a bowl of food, but he ignored them. Finally, he curled up near the door with his nose pressed against the bottom edge, as if he was still watching over her or waiting for her. I sat watching him. He breathed shallowly, rhythmically. His body was so thin, his fur was covered with dirt and burrs, but his posture was that of a soldier. Who teaches a puppy to carry that kind of weight? I thought about Willow, still sedated at the wildlife center. She had lacerations, was in shock, dehydrated, and her temperature was dangerously low. The veterinarians said the only thing that had kept her alive was that the puppy had lain on top of her, giving her warmth and calm. Ranger didn't know that. For him, they had simply taken her away again. When I finally fell asleep on the couch around 4 in the morning, I dreamed of tall, thin trees whispering things I didn't want to understand. In the middle of them, Ranger stood silently with his eyes fixed on mine, begging me for something I didn't know how to give. The next morning, he still hadn't touched his food, but he wouldn't leave my side. When I moved, he moved. When I stopped, he sat. My 13-year-old son, Caleb, came downstairs and froze when he saw him. "He's huge," he said. "He's a baby," I replied. Ranger looked at him for a long moment, then lowered his head and walked away. Each of us carried what we needed, and we never talked about it. Later that same day, I took him to the veterinarian. He didn't resist, didn't complain during the examination. He stayed completely still with his eyes fixed on the door the whole time. He had no microchip, no tag, no collar, but he did carry the marks of the past. Old scars on his chest and side, plus a recent cut on his front paw. The veterinarian guessed he had been alone for weeks, maybe longer. I asked him how it was possible he was still alive. He just shrugged, maybe instinct, or perhaps something stronger. They gave him antibiotics, cleaned his wounds, and still he didn't make a single whimper. He didn't cry. When the technician tried to pet him, he gently moved away. On the way back home, I stopped at a traffic light and looked at him through the rearview mirror. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking out the window, not with fear or curiosity, but searching as if he knew this wasn't his place, as if he was convinced he belonged somewhere else. Then he let out a soft sound, almost imperceptible, a kind of low, broken whimper. I shuddered. I understood something. Ranger, this German shepherd puppy, wasn't simply lost. He was looking for someone he had already found but had to leave behind. That night, he cried. Not loudly or constantly. They were low, deep sounds, loaded with pain that came from the depths of his small body. He didn't move from the window. He stayed there, curled up with his eyes fixed on the darkness outside. From time to time his body trembled, but he didn't try to leave. I sat in the hallway with the lights off, simply listening. I didn't want to interrupt what was happening inside him. It wasn't something that could be remedied with soft words or treats. Ranger was mourning, and not for himself. The next morning, he still wasn't eating much. Caleb, my son, tried offering him pieces of cooked chicken. Ranger sniffed them, took one carefully, and then lowered his head without chewing it. Caleb looked at me uncertainly. "He doesn't hate you," I told him. "He's just not ready." Later, while cleaning his paws, I noticed a dark brown stain on one of his pads. It wasn't mud. It was dried blood, older than his wound. It wasn't his. And then I understood. Ranger hadn't just lain on top of the fawn to give her warmth. He had tried to get her out of the fence. The cut on his paw, the drag marks we saw in the earth, it all made sense. Ranger had injured himself trying to save her. This wasn't about simple companionship. This was about rescue, about protection. That puppy had made a decision in that forest. He wasn't going to survive if she didn't. I called the wildlife center. Willow was still alive, but barely. They weren't sure she would ever be able to use her legs again. She was refusing food and flinched at every touch. They were doing everything possible, but they gently warned me to prepare in case she didn't make it. I didn't have the heart to tell them there were no children to prepare. There was only a dog who already knew that truth and couldn't bear it. That afternoon I went out to walk with Ranger on the trail near home, hoping the movement would cheer him up. But halfway there, he turned sharply to the left, straight into the forest. "Ranger, no," I whispered. "Not today." But he didn't listen to me. His body tensed. He sniffed the air urgently. He pulled harder, not like a dog following just any trail, but like someone seeking to return to something sacred. I followed him through the thicket. We were approaching the place where we had found him. Ranger moved with amazing precision, as if his paws already knew every centimeter of the path. Finally, we reached a clearing where the same twisted metal fence was still there, rusty, half-collapsed, hidden among vines and shadow. He stopped. He sat. He lowered his head. There was no trace of Willow, no sound. But Ranger behaved like someone who had arrived at a grave. And in that instant, something inside me broke, because in that quiet forest with light filtering through the trees, I wasn't just seeing a German shepherd puppy. I was seeing a soul that had already known pain, a being who stayed when others fled, who chose pain over abandonment. And I realized he wasn't lost. He knew exactly where he was going. The question was whether I could follow him. I took him back home in silence. He didn't resist, but he didn't look back even once. His eyes remained fixed on the forest, as if he had left something there that wouldn't come with him. That night the house felt different. He no longer paced back and forth. He didn't cry. He just lay in silence with his head resting on the threshold between the hallway and the door, as if waiting for someone to enter through it. Caleb sat in front of him with his legs crossed, as if he were going to draw him. He didn't say anything, just drew. Every so often he would look up, observe him, and return to his notebook. Ranger didn't move, but he watched him too. Later that night I reviewed the veterinarian's report more carefully. The wounds weren't serious, but there was one part that caught my attention. The note spoke of multiple healed scars, some consistent with restraint abrasions, and something more. The puppy showed signs of emotional withdrawal, with behaviors linked to mild trauma. The veterinarian was careful with his words. I didn't need him to be. I knew perfectly well what they meant. This wasn't the first time Ranger had been trapped, and yet, instead of becoming wild, that puppy had made a decision. Save someone smaller, more vulnerable than himself, A creature as defenseless as he was. With the little strength he had, he protected her, warmed her, bled for her. I leaned back in my chair, looking at the ceiling. "Who are you?" I whispered. The next morning, I received a call from the wildlife center. Willow had survived the night. "She stood up," said the rehabilitation specialist, "just for a moment, but she held herself up. She even took a bite of food. It's little, but it's a good sign." I brought my hand to my chest, feeling my heart race. "She reacted when a dog barked outside," the specialist added. "Did she have contact with any?" I swallowed hard. Yes, she had more than contact. I hung up and walked to the living room. Ranger was by the window once again, looking toward the trees. I knelt beside him and took out the video they had sent me. Just 10 seconds of Willow lifting her head with bright eyes, trembling legs. I brought the screen closer. "Look," I whispered. He looked at it only once and remained motionless, his tail rigid, holding his breath. Then, little by little, he raised his ears, took a step toward the screen, his nose touching it. His body trembled, and then he let out a short, sharp whimper, his first real sound in days. A moment later, his tail moved. Not fast, not happy, but it moved. That puppy understood everything. He had kept Willow alive long enough for help to arrive. He had chosen to stay with the pain, with hunger, with fear for her. And now she was alive. That afternoon he walked to his bowl and ate. Not everything, but enough. Then he lay down at Caleb's feet, dropping his head onto his sock-covered toes. He closed his eyes. Something had changed. He was still broken, still hurting, but there was a crack in the wall, and behind that crack there was light. The next morning, when I opened the door to get the newspaper, Ranger shot out. He didn't bark, didn't growl. He just left like a shadow with purpose. I barely had time to put on my boots, grab the leash, and run after him. He wasn't running wildly. He wasn't panicking. He was going somewhere and knew exactly how to get there. I caught up with him halfway down the trail behind our house, where the forest became thicker and the air colder. He went ahead of me with his nose low, tail erect, ears alert to something I couldn't hear. "Ranger, stop!" I called. He stopped and looked at me, then turned again and continued. I didn't put the leash on him. I didn't have the courage. I just followed him among the trees. We climbed a gentle slope between tall beds and tangled bushes until we reached the same clearing, the same piece of rusty fence half swallowed by undergrowth. He sat down. That German shepherd puppy lay down on the earth with a slow, deliberate movement. Then he looked at me as if saying, here is where she needed me." I stepped forward, stunned. The ground was talking from the recent rain. The air smelled of moss, wildflowers, and something else, the faint recent scent of an animal. Ranger pressed his nose against a piece of flattened grass and then exhaled forcefully. He wasn't smelling her. He was remembering her. That place wasn't just a memory. It was a marker. It was there that he decided to stay, where he chose not to flee, although he could have, where he bled for her, where he waited without knowing if anyone would come. He looked at me again, not with sadness or desperation, just with calm. I crouched next to him. My hand brushed the place where the fawn had been. Some short hairs were still stuck to the base of the fence. I swallowed hard against the knot that formed in my throat. "You saved her here," I whispered, "and maybe you saved yourself too." Ranger didn't move, but I noticed something different in his shoulders. A slight release, a bit of peace. On the way back home, he didn't pull on the leash. He walked beside me, slow and steady. At one point, his nose brushed my hand, just once. A contact. A connection. Caleb was waiting for us on the steps. "You were gone for a long time," he said, looking at Ranger. "He had a place to go," I replied. Caleb nodded. "Can I take him out next time?" I looked at the puppy who now rested peacefully at his feet, his body relaxed for the first time since we met him. "Yes," I said softly. "I think he'd like that." That night, Ranger lay down by the fireplace, not watching, not waiting, just resting. And for the first time, he let me pet his head without pulling away. That puppy no longer needed to be rescued. He just needed someone to walk with him toward whatever came next. But then Willow stopped eating again. The call came shortly after noon. The same voice that just days ago had told me she was eating, that she was standing up, now sounded tired, uncertain. "She's not responding like before. We're trying everything, but it's as if something has gone out inside her." I said nothing. I stood in the kitchen looking out the window with one hand resting on Ranger's head, who had sat beside me right when the phone rang, as if he knew. That night the old forest guardian returned. He paced back and forth, watched the door, and then lay down in the darkness, motionless except for the slight tick of his ears at any sound from the forest. I tried to sit next to him, but he moved away. He didn't growl or make noise. He simply didn't want to be touched. This wasn't just a puppy missing a friend. This was pain returning with full force. The next morning I made a decision. I called the rehabilitation center and asked if we could visit her. They hesitated. It wasn't usual for wild animals to bond with pets. Interactions should be limited. But when I told them who Ranger was and what he had done, they agreed. "We'll try it," they said, but no promises. When we stopped in the gravel parking lot, Ranger didn't bark and jump. He stayed completely still in the back seat, watching the buildings with a concentration that made my chest tighten. As soon as I opened the door, he got out, pulling gently on the leash. Not with desperation, but with decision. They guided us to an outdoor enclosure, fenced, shaded with grass and straw. Willow was lying in a corner, motionless, with barely perceptible breathing. A staff member stayed inside, watching. Ranger stopped. His whole body tensed for a moment, and then he took a step forward. As soon as Willow saw him, something changed. She couldn't jump. Her body was still too weak, but she lifted her head. Her ears moved, and she let out a sound I'll never forget. A deep, heartbreaking whimper that turned into a small bark. It wasn't loud or sharp, but it was full of something ancient, essential. Ranger lay down just outside the enclosure with his eyes fixed on her. He didn't move or wag his tail, he just watched her. The employee knelt beside him and offered her a bottle. Willow hesitated, then slowly, with trembling lips, drank. I couldn't even breathe. This wasn't coincidence. It was connection. That German shepherd puppy had carried her with him in his soul, and she had carried him in hers. During the next hour, Ranger didn't move. Willow, though still fragile, kept her head up, ate a little more, and didn't take her eyes off him. When it was time to leave, Ranger resisted just a little. His paws tensed. He looked at me, then at her. "I know," I whispered to him, "but now she'll be okay." He stood up reluctantly. Returning to the car, I looked over my shoulder. Willow was still watching us, and for the first time in days, Ranger lifted his head. His ears rose and his eyes brightened. Something had returned, not just to her, but to him too. At home, Ranger didn't collapse like before. He entered slowly, took a look around the living room and sat by the window. There was no anxiety, just presence. That night he ate all his dinner. I watched him carefully. It wasn't joy yet, but something had softened, as if a part of him had begun to let go. He didn't get upset when Caleb passed nearby. He let my hand rest a little longer on his back before moving away. He even sat on the rug without lifting his head at every sound. That week we started a new routine. Short walks in the morning, gentle games, brushing him on the back porch. He still didn't chase balls, didn't bark at squirrels, or pull on the leash like any other puppy his age, but he watched everything with a sharp, thoughtful gaze. He was an observer of the world, not yet a participant, until one morning, coming out of the shower, I heard quick, light footsteps. I ran down the hallway and saw him. Caleb was standing with his eyes wide open. Ranger was at his feet, looking at him with his tail moving gently. "He just came to me," Caleb said, almost in a whisper. "I didn't even call him." Caleb knelt and said, "Hello, friend." Ranger leaned forward and rested his chin on the boy's knee. I turned around before they could see my tears. This wasn't just healing, this was trust. Small, fragile, but real. That same afternoon, I received the call. Willow had taken her first steps on her own. The technician told me she was still trembling, but eating while standing and responding well. They believed she was going to recover. I looked at Ranger, who was lying next to my chair. His ears moved when he heard my voice. "She's walking," I told him quietly. He looked at me and his tail hit the floor twice. The next morning, something new happened. Ranger brought me his leash. I looked at him surprised. He had never done that. He never asked for anything. "Do you want to go somewhere?" I asked him. He moved his tail once. I opened the door. He went out and waited. He didn't pull or push, he just looked. We walked along the trail behind the house, the same one he had once dragged me along. This time he walked beside me, calm, confident, choosing presence over memory, and when we reached the curve near the clearing, he stopped, looked toward the forest, and then kept walking. He wasn't moving away from something. He was going towards something new. This puppy was no longer simply surviving. He was learning to live. A few days later, we were invited again to the rehabilitation center. They wanted to give Willow one last chance to reconnect before beginning the final stage of her process, complete separation from human contact. She was eating well and could move on her own, but still showed signs of withdrawal when she spent too much time alone. We think seeing him again might give her the closure she needs, they told us. But what they didn't know was that it wasn't just for her. Ranger had also changed these last days, calmer, more present, more curious. However, at night I still noticed it, the way he lifted his head at sounds from the forest, how he stopped in front of the window and stared at nothing. It wasn't finished. Not yet. We arrived in the afternoon. The sun was high, casting golden lines through the leaves. They led us to the same outdoor enclosure where Willow was. She stood on her thin legs, unsteady but firm. As soon as she saw Ranger, she lifted her head. What happened next no one could have predicted. Ranger didn't run, didn't bark. He walked slowly with his head low and ears relaxed. When he reached the fence, he calmly lay down. Willow took a few uncertain steps, 1, 2, 3, and stopped just centimeters from the mesh. Then she extended her small muzzle and touched his. The entire staff fell into complete silence. There were no words or movements, just two creatures who, having found each other in fear and pain, now greeted each other in stillness and light. Ranger didn't whimper, didn't seek comfort. He just breathed with soft eyes and a quiet body. Willow brushed the fence once more with her head, then slowly turned and walked toward the back of the enclosure. She wasn't moving away. She was simply moving forward, firm and calm. "She's okay now," someone whispered behind me. But I wasn't looking at Willow. I was looking at the German Shepherd puppy at my feet. His eyes followed her until she disappeared around the corner. Then he looked at me. He didn't need to go in or be closer. He just needed to see her one more time. On the way back, Ranger curled up in the back seat for the first time without being alert, without pacing back and forth. He slept as if something heavy had been released from his soul. That night, when the sun hid among the trees, he lay next to Caleb's bed, breathing calmly with half-closed eyes. No crying, no wandering, just peace. And I understood something I hadn't comprehended before. This wasn't a goodbye between them. It was a silent thank you. Thank you for staying, for waiting, for saving each other in a world that had almost forgotten them. Willow would be released in 2 days. The center team called to confirm it. She had met all the milestones, walking, seeking food on her own, responding to distant sounds. Her leg was healing faster than expected. They would take her to a protected area at dawn where other deer had been spotted. "She's ready," they said. I looked at Ranger. He was lying on the porch with his head on his paws, watching the wind move the trees. I didn't tell him immediately. I didn't know how to do it. That night, I sat beside him on the steps. "She's going home," I whispered to him. His ears moved, but he didn't lift his head. I ran my hand over his back, and although he didn't come closer, he didn't move away either. Then I knew he already knew. The next morning, I asked the center to allow us to see her one last time. They agreed with one condition: no direct contact. Willow needed to reintegrate fully into nature, and too much familiarity could interfere. We arrived before dawn. A fine mist covered the fields. The caretakers moved silently as they opened the back door of the transport. Willow remained inside, cautious but serene. Ranger didn't bark or get agitated either. He sat beside me with his eyes fixed on the box. Then she came out. She stopped on the grass, moved her ears and lifted her nose toward the breeze. Then slowly she crossed the clearing and went into the trees. Ranger followed her with his gaze and stopped only once, turning his head to look at her for the last time. And then she disappeared. He didn't chase her, didn't cry. He just sat and watched the place where she had gone, and after a long moment he exhaled. The guide looked at me. Most dogs would have gone crazy trying to follow her. "He's not most dogs," I replied. Back home, Ranger didn't lie down by the door or under the window. He lay down right in the center of the living room. When Caleb came home from school and dropped his backpack, Ranger lifted his head and moved his tail slightly. Caleb sat beside him, sinking his fingers into his thick fur. "She left, didn't she?" "She's free," I replied, and that word resonated inside me. Free. Ranger closed his eyes and sighed. For the first time since I met him, his body softened completely. It was as if he had finally let go of something he had carried for a long time. This puppy stayed when he could have fled. He gave us warmth, security, and companionship without asking for anything in return. And when the time came, he let her go. Not because she stopped mattering, but because he understood that love isn't about holding on, but about knowing when to let go so the other can live the life that belongs to them. Maybe now he could also start living his own. We never adopted Ranger. He adopted us, It all started with small gestures, how he followed Caleb from room to room, resting at his feet while he did homework, walking beside him to the mailbox. He never demanded attention, he just offered presence, calm, constant, firm. Caleb also began to change. That boy who before wouldn't take his eyes off the screen now spent afternoons on the porch, drawing, reading, simply being with Ranger. One afternoon I found them both lying on the rug, Caleb whispering something in Ranger's ear in a low, trembling voice. The dog didn't move, just blinked slowly and leaned toward him. Later, I asked him what he had said. "Just things," Caleb replied. "Things I don't tell anyone else." That night I looked at the ceiling with my heart full and broken at the same time. I hadn't realized how much pain still inhabited our house, how silently it had settled in since my husband's death. And then, effortlessly, a puppy had arrived and filled those empty spaces. The veterinarian authorized Ranger to do all his normal activities. "He's recovering wonderfully," he said. "Whatever you're doing is working." I wanted to say that it was Ranger who was doing the real healing. And then something happened that I didn't expect. We attended a school event for children and parents living with anxiety and trauma, an initiative I had connected with through my work as a nurse. I brought Ranger without knowing if it would be too much for him, but it wasn't. He moved among the children as if he knew exactly who to look for. A girl who didn't talk to anyone sat beside him and began to pet his ear. Her eyes opened, her breathing became slower. Another boy with trembling hands placed his palm on Ranger's back and murmured, "You're not scary. You're like me." A staff member approached me afterward. "Is he certified? Does he work in any therapy?" I shook my head. "No, he's just ours." "You should consider it. He's already doing the work." That night, Caleb said it first. "He's not just a dog, is he?" I nodded. He was exactly what we needed, even without knowing it. The next morning I ordered a custom tag. It arrived 3 days later. Caleb carefully placed it on Ranger's collar. It read, "Ranger, found in the forest, lives in our hearts." The puppy who once lay beside an injured fawn now slept on my son's chest, breathing deep and slow. 2 hearts sunk in shared silence, and for the first time in a long time, everyone in the house dreamed in peace. The last time we visited the Wildlife Center wasn't to see Willow. It was for a small outdoor event, a celebration of the successful reintegration of several animals into their habitat. Families gathered under tents, volunteers handed out brochures, and children pointed at photos placed on information boards. And there, among the images, a photograph stopped me completely. It was a low-angle shot taken weeks ago. In it, a German Shepherd puppy lay next to an injured fawn, his eyes fixed on the camera, motionless, protective. "Is that him?" Caleb asked. "That's him," I replied quietly. Below the photo, a simple title, "The Guardian." I looked at Ranger sitting beside me, serene, watching the children play. Caleb smiled. "He doesn't even know what he did." "Maybe he does," I said, in his own way. A woman approached with a clipboard in hand. "You brought Ranger?" I nodded. "We talk about him all the time," she said, as she crouched next to him. "His story changed the way some of our colleagues think about trauma, not just in animals but in people too." Ranger leaned toward her and brushed his nose against her knee. Later they showed a brief video. On the screen, Willow appeared walking slowly toward the forest. She stopped for a moment and then disappeared among the trees. Caleb took my hand. "She's okay," he said. "I know." And Ranger lay at our feet without lifting his head, just sighing, deep and silent. That night, when the sun hid behind the hills, I took him to walk to the clearing he had once dragged me to. The fence was still there, rusty, almost devoured by the forest. Grass had covered the old marks in the earth. Everything was calm. Ranger moved forward slowly with his nose low and tail still. He approached the site where she had once been, where he had chosen to stay, bleed, risk everything. He remained there for a long time. Then he turned around and walked toward me without hesitation, without looking back. And I knew in that instant that he had let go, not of the memory, not of what they shared, but of the weight. That puppy had guided another soul through darkness. Now it was time for him to walk toward the light, and we would be by his side every step of that journey. This little one's journey from abandonment to rehabilitation demonstrates how essential non-profit rescue groups are. Caring for a rescued puppy goes beyond love. It's a responsibility, an act of commitment, of constant care. It's showing up every day for a life that once had no reason to hope for anything. Ranger taught us that healing doesn't always look like running, jumping, or wagging your tail. Sometimes healing looks like staying still next to someone broken, and remaining there no matter how long the silence, no matter how long it takes. It wasn't a shelter or a syringe that saved him. It was a choice. His choice. Choosing to stay, choosing to protect, wait, love. And because of that choice, an injured fawn lived, a broken family found respite, and a calm, serene puppy who had every reason in the world to give up found a purpose. There are thousands more like him waiting for a hand, an opportunity, a willing heart. If this story touched your soul, share it. Every time it's told, it helps more puppies like Ranger find safety, healing, and family.